Welcome to this hands-on training on form solutions with ScreenFlows and Experience Cloud. My name is Evan Ponter. I'm co-leader of the Columbia, Maryland group. Thank you for being here today, both online and in person. So the first thing we're going to do is, once we have our Trailhead org spun up for our hands-on, if you want to follow along on the slides, there's a bunch of step-by-step directions, and it will be useful to have those at your fingertips for a little bit of copy and paste as we get into this. The reason I put this session together was there's a lot of conversation around different form tools that Salesforce professionals are using to connect public-facing forms into their Salesforce org. Some people are using Form Assembly or Form Titan, and there's a whole ecosystem of these third-party form tools. And what I've been watching in the Salesforce space is what is the Salesforce on-platform equivalent of those third-party tools. I myself have struggled through building out different Form Assembly forms and Form Titan and Form Stack, and they come with their own annual cost. They come with their own learning curve. They come with their own limitations on exactly what you can do to get data from like a third-party public website into your Salesforce org. So there's been a number of enhancements to ScreenFlows, and a couple years ago was experimenting using ScreenFlow to facilitate one of these form solutions. And with this conversations happening around, what's the best form tool to use, I sort of proposed at this point, I think ScreenFlow can handle it, and I got a lot of pushback. So I put together this session just to give everybody sort of an overview on what is possible using features that you already have included in your licensing for Enterprise org and above. Everything I'm showing you today, as long as you have an Enterprise org, you can do this without purchasing anything else. You don't need any community licenses. You don't need any installed packages. You have it all already. There's just a few things to enable and a couple different concepts to think about. This is the second or third iteration of this session, so I've put it together at first just to prove that yes, it can be done, but I've taken a second and third pass at it to make sure that I'm encouraging sort of scalable behavior that will translate well into real world scenarios and helps you stay organized and flesh out a number of these solutions. I've also had a mind for making sure these solutions are secure. So there was a lot of conversation over the summer in the Slack like flow spaces where people were wondering how secure are these Experience Cloud sites that are running in system context and flows that are running in system context, and what does that mean when you're using guest users. So I wanted to make sure that everything I'm talking about in this session sort of aligns with those architect security best practices. So all of that being said, we're gonna walk through a couple things, and it might seem like a little bit of extra work, but I promise you it's to help set you down the right path, that if you go to replicate this in a real life production org, it will scale, it will be secure, you'll be able to actually support these solutions in a meaningful, robust way. Sound good? If anybody still doesn't have a hands-on org spun up, let me know, and we can get that sorted out, but I'll sort of keep going here. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to create a custom object, which really just be the place where we store our form submission data. We're going to create an auto-launch flow that sort of serves as the connector between our public form and our Salesforce database, and some of the reasons why we might want to have that auto-launch flow be separate for a security standpoint. Third thing we're going to do, which we'll spend probably a bulk of our time doing, is creating a ScreenFlow and walking through some different nuances to think about as you're setting one of those up. And then the last step will be creating a digital experience site where we'll publish our ScreenFlow. And at the end, everybody will have a working form that you can test, and we can sort of, that's sort of a jumping off point for all the other bells and whistles you might want to get into. Our first thing we're going to do is we're creating a response object. So this is where we can store the raw data from all of our form submissions, all of our response data. And this is something you only need to do one time in your org, and you can use this same custom object for all of your forms. So it's not something you need to replicate for each individual form that you create. A lot of the reason behind this is for similar functionality you might find in other form tools, where a form assembly or a form stack or a Titan Forms, they all have a place where you can just see all the raw response data. There's nothing happening as far as automation around that. It's exactly what was submitted on the form. You have sort of an audit copy of that. So we can replicate that in Salesforce by using a custom object to store all of our raw form data. Another really good reason to do this is you can sort of eliminate any issues with people submitting your form by not having any synchronous automation on this object. No validation rules. It's literally just a dumping ground to put data into Salesforce. Doesn't mean you can't automate it all, just don't do it in a way that affects the transaction. You want that submission to save without any issues. Now, sort of what I do recommend doing if you want to do automation, set it up on an asynchronous path on a record triggered flow. That's a really good way to handle that. If you're more in the world of Apex, you can certainly set up Apex triggers that run calling feature methods or whatever else you want to do that happens outside the transaction.
So Evan, what you're saying is by having this sort of generic vanilla object to just take that information in, if ultimately you want the information you're collecting on your form to say land into a campaign member, right? Because you're signing up for people that you want to put into a campaign.
Right.
The automation comes later that says from this plain vanilla object, do the automation to create my campaign members, but like you want this intermediary thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a really good point. Yes, you ultimately will want the data to land in one or multiple places.
Right,
So
like you could send it lots of
yeah,
places.
You can do a whole bunch of things. So it might be like, I want to either create or update the contact record, and I want to add them to a campaign, so I have to figure out the campaign member record. But sort of what's nice about this is you have just that copy of that raw response, and if anything does go wrong in that future stuff, you can come back to that record and run it again.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's way
you're
easier.
making it analogous to the
Yeah.
my responses in form assembly is really helpful.
Yeah. Cool. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new custom object. So I should have put the slide numbers on here. So you'll have this one up. I think, I don't even know what slide it is.
And slide number 6.
Slide number 6, thank you.
Evan, how do I get from Bitly back to the slides? For some reason, I'm not there. I don't know why, so. What do I need to do to get to the slide from?
Take off the app part. So it's just
Let me try to help you with this.
bit.ly.
Yep,
Hang on.
yep, just gonna take the wheel. I think we'll get there.
Okay. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a custom object. Get launched into my org here. This is going to be really hard with my second screen not working. Something happened to my org that I spun up an hour ago, so I'm going to create a new one here. Thanks for joining us. So if you want to get caught up, if you go to trailhead.salesforce.com and then in your hands-on org area, you can spin up a new Trailhead hands-on org playground.
Wi-Fi password?
It's up there.
Perfect, thank you. What's up?
No, it's just
Okay.
fine.
All right, while that's happening, let me. Slide numbers on here. I'll give this one more minute, and if not, I'll go back into the prep org I spun up yesterday to practice all this.
That's like
You saw it, right? It was sitting there, and then I refreshed, and it disappeared. It's all ready to go. All right, let me jump in here and we'll keep going. You'll have to ignore that I have some of the finished pies already. So all we're doing is we're creating an object, very vanilla, so that we can store our raw responses there. So go into the setup menu and click on Object Manager. And then under the Create menu at the top right, you can go ahead and create a custom object. From there, we're going to call this response. You could call it submission. I even debated calling it submission. Any sort of generic word you have for your raw form submissions, you can call your object that. I tend to go with response because that's what Form Assembly called it. Feel free to use any other generic word. Description, I'll say stores the response data. Anything that helps you understand what this object is for. Then for the record type or record name and the data type, I tend to make this just an auto number. And then I put in like a R with 6 zeros for the display format. And then we'll start that with number 1. For optional features, I would recommend allowing reports and activities. You could do tracking field history. Typically, these records aren't going to change very much. They're going to get inserted, and then you're going to run your automation to put all that data where you actually want it to go. But you can if you wanted to. And the last thing I'll do at the very bottom is launch the new custom tab wizard. Everybody's ready. I think that's all we had for this slide. Go ahead and click Save. I already have an object, so you won't be able to do it twice, but you should be on the next page where we will create a tab. This is slide 7 now. Your tab, I would just use any image you want. I like to use the form image, but go ahead and pick that tab style, click next, and sort of blow through the default settings there. Create your tab. Once you have that set up, you should have a custom object and a tab, and you should land on the custom object page. So you should be looking at a response custom object. For our example today, we are going to be spinning up a sign-up form. So it's basically, do you want to subscribe to our emails kind of thing? Very simple, generic, just to get some basic information about a person. So we're only going to set up 3 fields for this. We need a first name, last name, and an email address. So our next step here is to create a custom field for each data point that we would want to capture on our custom object. So I'll leave this up. This is slide 8, but you can go through and set up 2 text fields, one for first name, one for last name, and then an email field for email. The one thing I try to do, especially with names, is I try to keep the length limits in line with what happens on leads and contacts, because that's where your data is going to end up. So first name is a max length of 40, and last name is a max length of 80. And you can look those up in any Salesforce documentation if you're curious about limits on other text fields. So go ahead and create the first name, last name, and email fields. When you're done, that's all from the Fields and Relationships tab. And I'll give everybody a few minutes to do that. And I will leave up the slide, but this is what you should end up with when you're done, is the 3 new fields on your custom object.
Still creating, but I took
Okay.
the notes.
Okay.
The slide.
You just put a comment in the chat once you're done with your 3 fields, so I know we can keep going. All set? Yep. Cool. People are caught up. So that's it for our custom object. I will point out that as you expand on this and you're setting up multiple forms or you have different use cases, you can keep using that same response object, just keep adding fields to it. Anything that's common, like if you're asking for first name, last name, email, absolutely reuse that on multiple forms. It'll help keep that nice and consistent for you. The other thing that I've done is part of your sort of asynchronous automation can be to relate that response record to an actual contact, if you wanted to do that. That gives you a nice audit log of seeing, here are all the form submissions that this contact has submitted. So that would be a lookup relationship to the contact, which you then populate using automation. We can talk about a few different strategies for matching to existing contacts.
Something else I think of, I feel like you're gonna use the same response form for multiple, like, real-life forms, like, on the layout of the response, you could maybe make section headers
Oh, absolutely.
for, like, these were the questions related to Form A,
Yeah.
real-life Form A, these
Yeah.
are the fields related to Form B, it might be
Yeah.
easier to go back to.
Absolutely. So you can do that with just a type drop-down field will work these days with dynamic forms and the ability to just sort of determine what fields show up. You can do that by section, you could do that by field. In the olden days, or if you're still using Classic, you could set up record types for each different form and set up your layouts that way. So a lot of different ways to surface that data and to see that audit log. Our next step is going to be creating that auto launch flow that I mentioned. And this serves as our connection from the public form to the database. And this is where we got to be careful from a security standpoint so that we're not exposing data from our Salesforce instance, and we're making sure people don't have the ability to go extract data or see anything they're not supposed to see. So this is the only piece of the whole solution that runs in system context. It allows us to execute the creation of the response record from the public Experience Cloud site, but we're not going to be granting any other permissions to the actual guest user. So this is sort of the linchpin that keeps everything working for us. These auto launch flows, they're very simple. I will walk through setting one of those up. You can reuse them on a lot of your forms. So if you have just an auto launch flow and all it does is create a response record, we're going to be passing in a record variable. So it makes it very generic, and we can reuse that across all of our different form solutions. So I'm on slide 10 now. This is analogous to what you see in other form tools where they have an integration to Salesforce, or they have a connector, or they might call it Salesforce integration. In the Salesforce world, this is just using the data elements in a flow, but we're going to be mindful to do that in a secure way. The benefit, I do also want to point out, you have the ability to create, update, get records, delete records. You can do everything in the data elements inside of the flow, where some other third-party tools might not have all of those options. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the setup menu and go to the flow area. So if you're looking at your setup page, you can go ahead and click on home. And then in quick find, you can search for flows. You'll find that under process automation. And then we're going to create a new flow from the button at the top right. We're going to start from scratch, so go ahead and click next on this screen. And then this is going to be an auto launch flow. There's no trigger for this, there's no screens in this. It's really just our ability to create a response. Use auto launch flow, and then click create at the bottom right. So the only thing we're going to add to the canvas here is a create records element. So go ahead and click add element, this plus sign. Under the data section is all of our data elements. This is our connection to the Salesforce database. So we're going to use a create records here. We're going to call this create response. The API name should get filled in automatically. Put a nice description here. Here's the response record. And then down at the bottom, we're going to create a record using a record variable. So right in line here, you can just go ahead and create a record variable. So we're going to do a new resource. And then for resource type, we're going to choose variable. For the API name, we're just going to call this response, same name as the object. In description, I'll put a response record. For data type, go ahead and choose record. And then the object is our response custom object we just created. So it's the one that says response underscore underscore C. The last thing we'll do is we will make this available for input. This auto launch flow is eventually going to run as a subflow. And we're gonna set it up for at least one screen flow, but in real life, you'll end up using this in a lot of different places for all of your different screen flows. Your record variable should look like this, and when you're ready, go ahead and hit done. I'll leave this up for a few seconds if you're still getting caught up. That's really it for our entire flow here. So I'm on slide 12. We're gonna save this and I'll talk about the security one last time. So your whole flow looks like this. Go ahead and click save at the top right corner. This flow label, we're gonna call it create response. Description, you can say it creates a response record. And I might even say runs in system context, so you know that. There are a few other places where Salesforce tells you this flow is going to run in system context.
Could you say a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah. So, if you click Show Advanced, there are 3 different ways your flow can run. By default, everything that a flow does is running in user context, meaning the permissions that the running user has are applied to anything you try to do in that flow. The other 2 ways you can run a flow is in system context with sharing and then in system context without sharing. Both of them mean that you're elevating the permissions of this flow interview to be able to do things that the running user might not have access to do. The sharing with and without part is just about what records the flow has access to. So if you run it in system context with sharing applied, that means the flow can sort of do everything for records that the user has access to. If you run it in system context without sharing, it's sort of like system admin mode. You can see and do everything. Yeah, you have access to all records in the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this flow up to run in system context, but keep sharing applied. We need to elevate it a little bit, but we're going to follow the principle of least privilege and make sure that we're not exposing any record data when we're doing this. We're just giving it the ability to insert a record. In fact, it's going to be inserting a record that flow doesn't even have access to go query. So it's sort of the most secure way we can think about doing this. So again, I'm under the advanced section. For how to run the flow, make sure you choose system context with sharing. It forces record level access. And once you have that, go ahead and click save at the bottom right corner. Last thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and activate this flow, assuming everything's saved successfully. That big blue activate button at the top right. Now we have our activated flow. That's it for our connector part of this. Step 3 is going to be creating a screen flow. There's a lot of ways to do this. What I like to recommend people do is you want a screen flow for each sort of solution that you need to create. A lot of times you might have a situation where somebody wants, or an organization wants to set up like an event registration form. And you might be inclined to think, oh, I need a screen flow for every single event where people are going to register. And you're going to burn yourself out really quick if you try to keep up with all the events that an organization is doing, building a one-off screen flow for each one. So what I like to do is sort of solve that event registration problem holistically, where you're building one screen flow and it facilitates any kind of event registration. So if they have 10 events a week, no problem. You reuse that same screen flow, you sort of pass in a parameter to sort of address which event that should be related to. But all the rest of the functionality is the same. So we're collecting the same information, we're doing the same thing with it. We're going to be creating a contact and a campaign member. We don't need to keep going through that solution if we just can think about it from a higher level and solve that need and allow that dynamic piece to handle just which event somebody's registering for. So the same is true for newsletter subscription. You're facilitating a dozen different newsletters. Don't try to build a screen flow for each one. Set up one that solves for that scenario and allow yourself the flexibility to pass in any sort of newsletter you want to subscribe to. Any other thoughts or examples of what you're thinking about there?
Well, if the same screen flow were being used at like multiple sort of campaign events,
Mhm.
could we just have a pick list for a campaign and just keep adding values to that as a new campaign forms or something, or is that? I know
Typically, what I like to do is pass in a record ID as a variable.
So you're saying there'd be one screen flow, but there might be multiple record triggered flows. And that's where you're passing in the ID of the particular campaign?
I can show you some examples. So like, if for every campaign we want a registration form,
Mhm.
you would build your screen flow in a way that accepts a campaign record ID.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things you could do with that, but at the very minimum, that ID is what you're going to use to create a campaign member record. You're going to take the first name, last name, email, you're going to find a contact, you're going to update a contact, do that piece. And then to figure out if you need a campaign member, you can query to make sure there's not one already in whatever status, and then use that ID to sort of make sure you create or update a campaign member record. And that same solution, that same logic can be used for any different campaign you might want to spin up. Where you can take that to the next level is then like you could set up your screen flow to pull in information from that campaign
Where does the
based on that
Where's
ID.
the flow get the ID in the
From the
first
URL.
place? From the URL of the
Yeah.
site that you ultimately set up?
Yes.
Got it.
So that anything you'd want to pass in can be a part of the URL, or it can be a URL parameter. There's actually a couple ways you could facilitate that. What I'm showing today is going to be a sort of standalone page, and you could set it up to pass in a URL parameter to do some fancy stuff like that. Cool. This flow is going to run in user context. All of your screen flows are very strict as far as security goes. They don't have any direct connections to your Salesforce org, and we want to keep it that way so that when somebody's looking at a screen flow that's on a public site, they don't have access to anything. Zero API access, no objects, no records, no field security. They can't do anything. The only thing we're going to grant them the ability to do is click next on the screen flow, which will run our subflows and take care of that elevated actions. But this screen flow is going to facilitate sort of the user interface, the things you want people to see, and I would encourage you to be very mindful about what you're showing people. If you do go to those extra steps to query for information and display it on your flow screen, that is public information that is on the internet now. So don't do anything that is going to be exposing data you don't want exposed. Today's example is sort of, it's one way we're collecting information, so we're not going to expose anything. But keep that in mind as you are tinkering with these types of solutions. Here are the equivalents. So from other form tools, you might be used to creating another form or creating pages for that form. You add content, you add questions. In the Salesforce world, we're going to create a screen flow for every form that we want to spin up. If we want it to be multiple pages, multiple screens, we can use different screen elements on the flow canvas. And then as far as the input fields, the content or the questions, we're going to use components, input components, maybe some display text to sort of add what we want to what people see in the user interface. I'm on slide 15 now. We're going to be creating our screen flow for our newsletter sign up. So we're going to go back into the setup menu. If you click the back button, if you're still looking at the flow canvas, That'll take us back to our flow section. And then we'll create a new flow at the top right corner. And this time we're going to, again, start from scratch, click next. And we're going to be using a screen flow. It's already pre-selected for you. Go ahead and click create. First thing we're going to do, if you click add element, we'll add our first element to the canvas. First thing up is going to be a screen, and you can call it anything you want. You could call it sign up screen, you could call it anything you want. Typically at the top is the label for the flow, and you can control if you want that to display or not. I have seen on the Salesforce's flow roadmap, they are going to make it so you can decide what shows up at the top of your screen, and one of those options is the label that you put for the screen properties. So it's something to be thinking about, like what would you want to be sort of public facing for the header of this screen? So I might call this, or our call to action is sign up, which is the same thing I'm going to call the screen flow overall. So this flow label will end up saying sign up across the top.
And like, so if you are imagining a multi-page or multi-screen process, like maybe in the description, you would put like page 1 or
Sure.
something like that.
Yeah.
Like, and if you were already anticipating multiple pages.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean you can only control the header by this screen property. The other option you have is to use display text and then hide the header. So if you wanted to do something, today, right now, that might be a cleaner way to do it.
That's what I usually do for my
Yeah.
screen flows. I mean, they're internal screen flows, but
Right.
still, I don't want you to see the screen flow name because
Sure.
it's long and confusing for people.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's a lot of options for what you want to do at the top of your screen there. What we're going to focus on next is the footer. So if you expand that footer section, you can customize the labels for your buttons. So one thing I definitely recommend doing, next and finish are typically not the strongest call to actions there. So I always like to use a custom label for that. And I'm going to call this submit, or I'll put submit in for my label. Previous is going to show up if there is a previous screen in your screen flow. It's not really going to matter for this example, but I go ahead and hide that just so there's no confusion there. Same thing for pause. I don't have any use cases that I've come across for pause, so I typically always go and hide pause. You definitely want to clean this up so there's no other distractions or people doing stuff you don't want them doing. So one of my recommendations is always hide the pause button. Previous, there's legitimate use cases where you'd want people to be able to go back and forth. I'm okay with that. But what your footer should end up looking like this. Custom label for next, we're going to call it submit, and then I've hidden previous and pause. All right, our next step is we're going to be adding our input elements to the screen. So it's going to be 3 input elements, first name, last name, and email. We're just going to drag each one to the screen and then set up some of the validation for it. So over in the components on the left, if you search for text, one of your input components is text. You can drag one of those onto the screen.
What's the difference between components and fields? Like my intuition would have been to say like, take a field from an object.
Yes, excellent. So there is the ability to sort of set up a record variable and then use the fields from that object. What ends up happening is all of your configuration settings are very tightly coupled to what you've set up on that object. So if our first name field on the object is not required, it will not be required on the screen flow. If you have help text, that help text will show up on the screen flow. For a lot of these use cases, I want my response object to not have any validation, no required fields, but I want to require information on my screen flow. So what I end up doing is using just the bare bones components to do that so that I have all the bells and whistles to control all the validation, what's required, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Are you answering that in relation to like using a text component versus like the email component that had?
That too.
Oh, okay. I was wondering.
Yeah, all right, so this first one is gonna be first name. That should auto-populate for the API, and this is where we do have the ability to mark this field as required for this ScreenFlow without making the field required at the database level. We also have like read-only, disabled, and default value options, if you wanna play with that. There are cool use cases for pre-populating a form. Like if you're sending an email to somebody and you want them to load up a form and you already know some of their information, you could pre-populate, first name, last name, that kind of thing, and let them fill in the rest. So there's cool spots you can use that.
Quick question on that. Is
Yeah.
it possible to like ask for their email and like that first question and then pre-populate, like query the database and then pre-populate that same screen?
Yeah. Now you could do that, but that's gonna get very dicey because now anybody could go put anybody's email and they'll see what record you have in your system. Yeah.
That's not good.
Right.
Okay.
But it's good to be thinking about, like, if you tend to go down that path, like, keep in mind this is a public form.
Right.
So you don't want to just make it really easy for someone to extract data
That's true.
by knowing one piece of information.
Thank you.
All right, one of the things that's important to do is always keep your inputs very tightly validated so people can only enter acceptable information as much as you can. One of the ways we can do that is with this validate input section. So for this error message, I'll go ahead and say that please enter up to 40 characters. And then for the formula, I'll leave that for a second. So any kind of error message you want to display, we're going to make sure that the length of what people type in here is less than or equal to 40 characters. And we can do that with a length function. So it's len open parenthesis. And then we can reference our first name field. It shows up as a resource under the screen components. Close that length function. And then I'm going to put in less than or equal to 40.
And that's the first name component of the ScreenFlow, not of the resource
Yes.
object.
Yeah. So we're in the world of flow here. So everything we're doing is sort of related to the screen and what's happening in flow and memory. Nothing in this ScreenFlow so far is at all connected
Right,
to
we have
it.
to talk to
Yeah.
that custom object we made.
Right. Okay. On slide 17 now, we're going to do the same thing for last name. It's all very much the same steps, just a little bit different of a validation. So again, we're going to drag a text input field. We're going to label this last name. I'm going to mark it as required. And then for validate input, I'll say please enter up to 80 characters. And I'm getting those limits from the name limits on contact and lead record. 40 characters for a first name and 80 characters for a last name. For the formula, I want to check the length of my last name field. I want to make sure that it is less than or equal to 80.
Provide all engagement records exist. Push. No Java form data.
And the last one we'll do is email. And to Jabari's question, I know this from very painfully having to rip it out and swap it.
Oh.
That the email component here does not lock down and validate email addresses in the same way that an email field does, like on a contact or lead record, that email data type.
Oh.
Last time I tested that out, this component will allow more than 80 characters. So for whatever reason, we had somebody who just like typed a bunch of garbage
Uh-huh.
and then it like errored out and the client got real upset. So what I've done is I use a regular text input element, and then I add my own validation
Mhm.
to as closely mimic what the Salesforce email data type does.
I see.
And I've had way more success with those out in the wild.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll show you what I've been doing for that. So again, we're gonna drag a text input element onto the screen. We're gonna call this email. That'll auto-populate the API name. I want this to be required. And for validate input, this is one of the times that having the slides will be useful. The error message, we want to say, enter a valid email address up to 80 characters. First part of the formula starts like the others. We're going to check the length to make sure our email field is less than or equal to 80. Second part I do is I use a regular expression to make sure that we have all the pieces of an email, that sign and the .com and that whole thing in the right order with all proper characters. So if you have the slides, I recommend just copying and pasting this. Basically what's happening is we take our email input, we put it all in lowercase, we trim any trailing space characters, and then we make sure there's a domain name, or sorry, a handle can be any of these characters before the @ sign. Then we have an @ sign, and then the domain part is letters, numbers, dashes are the only thing accepted there. You can do that sort of as many times as you want. Some people have like .nih, .gov, there's a couple dots in there. That's all accepted. And then at the very end, we just have our like top level domain, usually like .com, .net, that sort of thing. If you want more details, follow up with me. I'll be happy to sort of walk you through that. You can also put that into any of your favorite LLM and have it explain the regular expression to you. There's even like regex 101. We'll do some of that for you too. I copy that regular expression, and then we're gonna paste that in here at the end of our validate input. So again, I've got length of the email is less than or equal to 80, and the input meets this regular expression criteria. I'll give you a few seconds to get that in place. All right. Once you do that, we can go ahead and click done on this screen. We'll move on to our next element. So we're going to add an assignment. So we have our interface, we have places for people to put their information. We're going to map that to a response record in flow memory. So we're still not connected to the database, but we're getting closer to that. But this step allows us to make use of our subflow in a very reusable way by just passing in a record variable, and it'll accept any fields that exist on that object. So that's how we don't have to specify each one. We don't have to have a bunch of input variables. We have one record variable that serves as the input, and we can define it with whatever data we want to have live on that record we're about to create. So back on our flow canvas, after your screen, go ahead and click the plus sign to add an element. And under the logic section, choose assignment. This is allowing you to manipulate values and sort of move them to different places. We're going to take our screen input data and we're going to map it to a response record in memory. I'm going to call this assign values to response. You can say assigns the input values to a response record in memory. Now, for our variable, we're gonna create it sort of on the fly here. We don't have one yet, so when you click into the variable input field, you can create a new resource right here. Go ahead and click on that. Resource type is going to be variable. API name is going to be response. This is our response record in memory. A response record in memory. Our data type for this resource is a record. And the object is our response __ C custom object. That's it. So we're not making this a collection. We don't need to make it available for input or output. So once you have that response record variable set up, go ahead and click done. Now, once that exists, we actually want to go ahead and map our values to fields on here. So I'm on slide 20 now. We're going to click directly on that response record variable so that we can just go ahead and start assigning values to its fields. So if you click through in here, you'll see all of the fields that exist on our response object. First one we're going to do is first name. So scroll down, you can type it out and click on first name. We're going to set it equal to a input component from our screen. So if we click into our sign up screen, we'll find our first name screen component field. And we're just doing straight mapping here. So we'll do the same thing for the other two fields. We'll click add assignment. We have our response record variable, so click into that. Search or scroll down to find last name. And we're going to set that equal to the last name field from our screen flow. So under screen, sign up, click on last name. And the last one we'll do is the email field. So record range and response. Search for that email field and set that equal to under screen sign up. There's our email input. You should end up with this when you're all done. Now our next step, once we've collected the input, we've sort of mapped it to a response record in memory. Now we're ready to actually commit it to our database. So this is the part where we connect the form data to our Salesforce instance. And we're going to do that by adding another element here after the assignment. We're going to choose subflow. We've already set up our create response record subflow, which has elevated permissions so that it can actually execute that action. So click on subflow.
That's why we didn't just do a create element in this flow.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
This screen flow is going to run
Makes sense now.
in user context.
Yeah.
Which does not have access to do anything in our Salesforce instance.
But a subflow does.
Because the
subflow.
user is going to be a
A
guest
guest
user
user.
that has no access to do anything, so it's like they're just putting pencil on a piece of paper,
Exactly.
and then somebody else, the other flow, has to actually then put it in the system.
So in a nutshell, you can't see anything, but my flow can.
Yes. My flow has the power to do stuff that I'm not going to let you do
Yeah.
directly. Via the API, that's the important part. So some nefarious person tries to get API access to do something, they have none, zero. That's very important for these.
Love it.
Yeah. So in our subflow, you can search for it, or it's probably not too far down on your screen, as our create response auto launch flow we created earlier. So if you click on that, you can give it a label. I'll call it create response. That'll auto-populate the API name, and then the description can be create a response record. It tells you right here, the reference flow is set to run in system context with sharing and forces record level access. So The subflow has elevated permissions, even though our screen flow, the canvas we're looking at here, is running normally in very secure mode. It has our input value that we had set up. If you don't see this, we'll need to go back to your flow and make a change, which you can do that right here if you needed to. So you can open the reference flow in a new window. So for the input values, go ahead and toggle on this response record input variable. And if you click in here, you can choose a resource from this flow. So this is how we allow two flows to talk to each other, is by setting up input and output variables. What we're going to do is we're going to tell our subflow, hey, go create this response record. I just, I got the data from the person. I sort of penciled it into a response record. I want to commit it to the database now. So this record variable we created called response, you can go ahead and click on that. Now it's going to try to drill into that and have you pick a field, but we don't want to choose a field. We want the overall response record variable. So once you click on it, just click on any blank spot.
That's the thing that always kills me about these. I'm like, what? Like, I think that it's trying to push me to do more,
Yeah.
and I think I have to do more,
No.
but I don't have to do more.
Not always.
That's what you.
Exactly. I feel like I do. I feel
Yeah,
bullied
yeah.
to have to do more.
Yeah, so your set input value should be set to just response. There should be no dots, there should be no arrow, no field next to it. It should look just like this. And I have a screenshot of that if you need to go back and look at that. I also had it as step 7 here. All right. Now, the last thing we'll do on slide 22 is a lot of these other form tools have a way to display a success message, or they call it an acknowledgement, or a submission message, or a confirmation text. We can do that in our screen flow just by setting up another screen and putting some display text. And then we can control the navigation on that screen so they can't go anywhere or do anything. And that serves the same experience as one of these success message functionalities from these other form tools.
Or say if you want to have redirect them back to your organization or company's website,
Yeah.
and have it redirect.
Yeah, so I have a slide later on about doing redirection. There's no native way, but you can install an unofficial SF package that allows you to redirect to any URL. Yeah, it's a little bit of extra step if you want to do that, but totally possible.
But the native functionality is just display with nowhere to go, a dead end display.
Well, we're gonna do that. Native functionality is either just end the flow and start over, or display a screen and you can have navigation on that screen or not. So I'm gonna show just here's the way I would set it up just to do a confirmation message. Yeah, there's lots of options. So this is not too different than what we did for the sign up screen. At the very end, after our create response subflow, we're gonna add one more element to our canvas. We're going to choose screen under the interaction heading. And you can label this confirmation. Confirmation screen, whatever you want to call it. For the header, I would go ahead and just toggle off the header. No other distractions here. For the footer, I would hide previous, hide pause, and then if you scroll back up to the top of that section, we're just going to go ahead and remove the footer altogether. So uncheck show footer, and your preview should look like just a white box. Now, over on the left side in the components, we can search for display text. We had mentioned earlier, but we're actually going to use it here. Drag some display text onto the screen. I'm going to give it an API name of message. And in here, you can say any sort of success message you want to show people after they've submitted your form. So you can say, thank you for signing up for our newsletter. You have a little bit of styling choices here. One of the things I like to do is maybe bump up the font size. So I'm going to set this to 20. And then you can center the text on the screen. And that's just a real 2-second version of doing a success screen for people. So it's something they see immediately on the screen after the actions have all completed. and sort of at the end of the submission. You can put pictures here, you can put links here, there's a lot of bells and whistles you could add to this. And if you want to do redirection entirely to like a different web page, I do have some slides later on about the unofficial SF package for that. Excellent, so go ahead and click done once you have your display text set up and you've got rid of all the buttons and headers. You should just be seeing this preview. That was 23 and 24. So this is what your flow canvas should look like at this point. Last thing we'll do is we're going to save and activate this flow. And again, we're going to leave it running in user context. So at the top right, go ahead and click save. We're going to call this sign up. I tend to call the flow the call to action. And then you can say public facing form that allows someone to sign up for our newsletter. Once you have that, go ahead and click save. There it is.
Was there a context change on this?
No.
Did you say that? Okay.
So I'm leaving the default setting, but if you wanted to, you can go specify user. Either way, it's going to be running in user context, aka no permissions. Great. For our guest user. And we can go ahead and activate this flow.
And I'm getting a warning that says my create response subflow. The parent flow is set to run in default mode. The referenced flow is set to run in system mode. Did I just miss a setting somewhere?
Is that a warning or an error?
There's a warning.
Yeah, warnings are okay. So yeah, mine says that too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my confirmation screen doesn't have navigation. That's intentional.
Right.
And then the subflow.
Oh yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, subflow is set to run in system mode with sharing. We're aware of that. We know we're elevating permissions, but Salesforce is trying to say like, hey, this could be a problem if you're not careful about what you're doing.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it
Yeah.
matched whatever you had, and I
Yeah.
didn't miss something.
I got an actual error. Let me see what I.
Oh,
Maybe
you
because of
you had it
picture.
in
Maybe because of the picture.
You had it in image. Trying to get extra credit.
You can set either allow finish or allow back.
Oh,
to
no,
false.
yeah, so, I sort of mentioned that, but
Yeah.
one of the things I did in my footer was I didn't hide the next or previous, I left it there and then unchecked show
Got it.
footer.
Got
It doesn't like it when you hide all the buttons, these
Good.
settings, but you can hide the footer.
I
So
see.
why did you have, why did you have to do hide previous and hide pause? If you're gonna hide the footer in
Right.
overall anyway, why also
Sounds
hide it at the button level?
I'm being extra cautious, because I never want
Okay.
somebody to find a way to click pause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. Just got a little themselves with my hiding. Right. Everything.
Once you're all squared away there, warnings are okay. You should have probably 2 warnings. Go ahead and click activate on this flow. All right, last thing we'll do for this screen flows, we're gonna go edit the access for this screen flow. Salesforce has been locking down what guest users can do sort of out of the box by default. And they're making it so that you have to intentionally go grant access for anything you want a guest user to be able to do. And that has carried over into the flow world as of like 5 or 6 releases ago. This step is now necessary. So there are access settings for flows, and by default, it's kind of like any user you have in your org who has like a run flow permission can sort of run flows. The guest user doesn't have that permission. So in order for us to allow a guest user to run a flow, we need to explicitly grant access to that flow to that guest user. The easiest way to do it, which we'll do today, is just enable it for that guest user's profile. You do have the option to do it via permission set if you're in a very like permission set led security model. So what we're going to do is if we click the back button from our flow canvas, we want to get back into the Salesforce setup menu where the flows are all displayed. You can sort this by last modified so you see the flow you just created. At the very end of the row, there's a action drop-down menu, and there's this edit access menu option. Go ahead and click on that. And in here, all we need to do is override the default behavior. So this is going to go from like the user just has to have the run flow permission to making it so we can grant access to this flow for specific profiles or permission sets. So check that override default behavior checkbox, and then we're going to click save.
Oh, we don't have to pick a profile?
We don't have a profile yet, nor would we be able to pick it here even if it did exist. So we will grant access later, but we do want to override the default
We need to
behavior
do
now
that.
while we're at it. All right, our last section today is creating the digital experience site. One site can be used for all of your forms, so you don't need to create a separate site for each form you want to set up. I tend to find that you just need one site for your organization in general. As long as you have one brand, one site will work for you. We're going to organize our forms under a subdirectory. Part of what I've seen play out is people might start using an experience site for a couple forms, and then they expand it to like a dozen forms, and they're like, well, I want to have a home page. And they start using it for more and more stuff. So I want to send you down a path where like we're going to, from the get-go, just organize our forms into a subdirectory so that we're sort of out of the way and don't like take over your home page or like do anything that would prevent you from easily taking that next step with your Experience Cloud site. The other thing I mentioned, you don't need any additional licensing to set up a digital experience. As long as you're on Enterprise Org or above, so Enterprise, Performance, and Unlimited, you can set up to 100 digital experience sites. So 100 different brands, 100 different domains can all live in your Salesforce Enterprise Edition org. You don't need any licenses. So all we're taking advantage of for our public ScreenFlow is the guest user license that comes by default once you spin up a digital experience site. And I'll talk through a couple other implications about why we choose certain things along the way, but you don't need to purchase community licenses in order to do this at all. Any questions on that? If you want
Talk
to-
about not being bullied. Don't let your account manager,
Right.
account executive
Yes.
bully you into buying something you don't need.
The only time you would need like communities licenses or Experience Cloud licenses is if you want an authenticated experience for people, where people have their own credentials, they can log in, have like a little portal that can see certain data relevant to that. All very cool stuff, not knocking on that. But for these public forms, we don't need to go to that level. We don't need to spend that money in order to do this. The equivalent to other form tools, Digital Experience handles the publishing aspect, the part where you have a form on a URL where you can share the public address. And I think you have a little more control about what that URL is when you're using digital experiences, whereas some of these other form tools give you like a random string of numbers and letters, and it doesn't make any sense to a human. So we have some nice ability to brand our URLs when we're setting up these solutions. The first thing we're going to do is pretty easy. We're going to go enable digital experiences. I've already done it in this org, but I have two screenshots here. So if you go into the setup menu and search for digital experiences in the quick find on the left, you'll see that section and you want to click on settings. And in settings, you just want to check off that enable digital experiences checkbox and click save. that's gonna pop up with a warning that says, hey, you can't change your domain name now. So every Salesforce instance has like a my domain name. Yours is probably branded to your organization's name already. Or you got a random string of numbers when that conversion happened, if you have an older org. Your digital experience is gonna use that same my domain name as its base URL by default. There are ways you can set up custom domains and set up like what is it called?
Redirecting?
Not a redirect, what's
This site,
subdomain? You can set up a subdomain CNAME record on your website, and then you can route that to your Experience Cloud site. So yeah, if you wanted a completely custom domain, that is still possible, but this pop-up is just telling you you're gonna get the my domain name from your Salesforce org. Go ahead and click OK on that. I do have the instructions here in the slides if you wanted to do a custom domain name. It takes a couple steps with your DNS records, but it's pretty cool once you get it set up that you can point a branded domain to your Experience Cloud site. You could do that for just your forms. You could, if you're going to take extra steps with your Experience Cloud site, it's really nice to have that be branded and match your company's website. Excellent. Once you have that set up, you should land on the page where you can create a new digital experience. Get to mine. You need to find it again. It's going to be under digital experiences and then all sites. We're going to go ahead and create a new site here. So click that new button. This is one of the important considerations. Everything I'm showing you today can be done without additional licensing, as long as you choose the correct template. We're going to use build your own Aura for a very specific reason. I'll go back for a second. Build your own Aura allows you to put a screen flow on your page and the guest user can run it. If you were to choose LWR, which is the latest and greatest, Salesforce is going to highly encourage that. There are wonderful benefits to using it. One of the stipulations they put in the fine print is you can't put a screen flow on an LWR site unless you're paying for communities licenses. You have to have at least one. I've even gone to the extent of like, you could buy the cheapest, just login based license for an LWR site. It'll cost you like $1.80 a month as a nonprofit. I forget what the for-profit pricing is. But for very low cost, you could just buy one license, not even use it, spin up an LWR site, and that would give you the ability to run flows on that site.
What's LWR?
Lightning Web Runtime. So the same way that Lightning components are Aura and then Lightning Web Components, the Experience Cloud product went through the same transformation, where all the older stuff is built using Aura components, and they wanted to use Lightning Web Components, so they have this Lightning Web Runtime framework that they use for all the latest and greatest. Supposedly it has a lot of really cool like localization and like progressive rendering and like all the fancy latest web technology built into it. So if you have a very busy page or you have worldwide audience and you need that locality and that progressive rendering, you're probably big enough that you can afford $1.80 a month to buy one license and make that happen.
It sounds like using the LWR would be if you're like really building out a community with all these different components, but for like just displaying the form that we're doing.
Right. So yeah, you're gonna go wild with Experience Cloud sites. Definitely take advantage of LWR. If you're planning on buying a license or already have licenses anyways, 100% go for it. If you're on a very shoestring budget and you just want to get this flow public without spending any extra money, we're gonna do the build your own Aura option.
You change it later, or is it per site, I guess?
You can't go from Aura to LWR. You can, I think, change to like another Aura template.
Okay.
Yeah, but you are kind of locked into which framework you're using. And it is per site. So yeah, you could set up one Aura, one LWR. And again, you have up to 100, so you could experiment with both. I would recommend doing that in the sandbox. These sites are sticky, so once they're created, I think you can archive them now, but you can never truly delete them, I don't think. I might be wrong on that. They might have had an update. It used to be you couldn't even archive, so they were just always kind of there, but inactive.
Are there any limitations to sandbox versions of the Experience Cloud?
I don't think so. It's full-fledged.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Like even like a developer? or
Oh yeah,
whatever?
that's what we're doing here.
Oh.
Yeah.
I must miss that part, sorry.
No worries. All right, so we're gonna do build your own aura. Go ahead and click get started. We'll put a name in for this. I like to just call it like your organization name. Whatever you want to do. It is something that's going to be public facing, so as your web page loads, this name you type in here will flash on the screen. You can update it later, so you're not locked into it. Just be mindful. Don't call it something that's, private and internal, because yes, people will see this. You don't need a URL on the back end. You can just leave it with default. Go ahead and click create. I do because I already set up one, but you should not have to do this. While that's spinning up, we're going to go into the builder and we're going to set up our subdirectory for all of our forms. And then we're going to spin up a dedicated page for our first form. Any questions so far while that one's loading on my end?
So you're saying that you can have one site for your whole organization, but if you've got 5, well, any number of different kinds of forms that you need, those are then in the subdirectory.
Yes.
And the subdirectories each have their own URL.
Yes. We have control over all of those things. So, our next step here is under My Workspaces, click on Builder. It's going to launch the Builder in a new tab. Here's our home page. We're not going to touch that. We're going to sort of leave that in case you want to use this later. At the very top of the screen, there's a little drop-down menu next to the home. This is like the page menu at the top here. Expand that, and then at the very bottom, you should be able to create a new page. And here, we're going to click through a couple options, just the basics. We're going to stick with a standard page. We're not going to do an object page. We're going to do a new blank page at the top right corner. And then we're going to choose flexible layout. Once you have that, click next. And this is going to be our subdirectory for all of our forms. What's allowing us to do is instead of having our forms live at the top level of our site, we're going to organize all of them under this forms subdirectory. Once you got forms typed in there, it should do the URL for you automatically. Go ahead and click create. You can also think of this as like if you had a navigation menu, you would have forms, and then if you click that, it would stand open, and all of your forms would show up with their own pages underneath of it. In fact, you could set up a navigation menu for this site if you wanted people to just be able to go to any form and do that. All right, so this is our forms subdirectory. Now I'm on slide 32. And we're going to do the same thing again to create another page, but this is going to be the dedicated page for our sign up form. It's going to live underneath of this forms subdirectory. So again, from this forms little drop down menu, if you hover over the 3 dots to the right for that forms page, it's the page actions. Click on that, and then we're gonna add a subpage. That's just gonna help us keep our forms nice and organized as we flesh out different form solutions. We'll go through this again, standard page, new blank page, and then we're gonna do flexible layout. And that just makes it really easy to adjust the width and look and feel. Once you've got that, click next. This page is gonna be called sign up. And this is where you could, you're getting a human readable URL. You'll see it's piecing it together for you here. You're gonna have your base URL /forms/sign up. And if you want to call this something else or like take out the dash, like you have the ability here to make this URL whatever you want it to be for public facing use cases. So set that up how you want and then click create. Now I'm on slide 33. We're going to add our flow component to our page here. The way we do that is at the top left corner, there's this components menu. If you expand that out, you can search for flow. And under the process automation, you can drag that flow component right onto the screen. And for our simple flow, there are no inputs. All we need to do is choose which flow we want to run. And ours is going to be called sign up. Go ahead and choose that flow. If you're getting fancy and you have input components available in your flow, those would show up here and allow you to specify URL parameters.
Okay.
If you're getting to that route. So I have a slide on that later, but wanted to at least point that out here. Last thing we'll do, I don't even think this is in the instructions, but if you click on the column that's behind your flow component, it's the section. If you expand out this section, you can change the width to sort of make this narrower. We have a very simple form, so we don't need it to be 100% width. So it's kind of good to know that you can easily set the width of your overall form right here using this flexible layout.
I have a vague recollection of having to go and make a flow available to a guest user at some point.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
That's right
Sorry.
here.
Sorry.
Perfect segue.
Oh, wow.
Thank you,
I
Dave.
had no idea. Sorry.
So once you've got that formatted the way you want, you've selected your flow, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to grant public access to both the page and to the flow. So there's two steps happening here on one slide. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to grant public access to this page.
Is there like a save or something? I guess there's a preview.
Experience Cloud is kind of always saving every time you make changes. Nothing gets published out to the internet until you click the publish button, which we'll do in a few seconds. But yeah, it's always auto-saving behind the scenes.
All right, so we're going back to the setup somewhere.
We're staying right here in the builder. So from the top, again, we're going to that page menu. If you hover over the page actions for our sign up page, we're going to click on page settings. And here's where we have page access. This gives you very granular control for, we have our one site, we have a bunch of different forms, we have a bunch of different pages. We can decide which pages are publicly available. Right now, by default, everything requires login. And we kind of want to keep it that way so that we can make that decision later. For these public-facing forms, we can just go ahead and make this specific page is going to be public. Not the form subdirectory, but in fact, each individual form that we publish, we have granular control over that. So once you've set that page access to public, I think that's it for this part. We're going to go ahead and publish our site and then click the acknowledgement there. So at the top right of the screen, you can click publish. It's telling you this is going to be your URL. It might be useful to go ahead and copy this because we're going to need it to do our testing in a few seconds. So click publish and then Click got it. And you're gonna get an email confirmation once those changes are live. Should come very quickly. The last thing we need to do, we have a page that does not require a login. It has a flow on it, but we haven't granted access to that flow yet. So, and I do this at this point because it's sort of the easiest way to get to it. On the left side of our flow builder, there's a settings menu at the bottom of that left panel. And on the general tab, at the very bottom is guest user profile. This is that built-in profile that gets spun up with every site that you create. And this is the easiest way to get to it. It's just a hyperlink down here at the bottom that takes you to the profile in the setup menu. So go ahead and click on that. And remember earlier when we overrode our flow access? This is where we're going to actually grant access to that flow for this profile. So yours should be called whatever you named your Experience Cloud site. This is a profile like any other profile. One of the related lists is enabled flow access. So if you hover over that, you can click edit and we can adjust which flows this profile has access to. If you wanted to do it via permission set, you do have that option. You should only have one. I have two because I did this earlier. But go ahead and make your flow enabled for this profile and click save.
You're gonna have a profile per site, I guess.
Correct.
Okay.
If you only have one site for your org, then you only have one profile to manage. All right. Last thing we'll do is we can test our site now. So what I encourage doing is you're typically logged into Salesforce as you're doing this. So you're a system admin, you have all these permissions. If you want to test your public facing form, make sure you do it in an incognito window or a private browsing window. That way you're not using your Salesforce session. You are sort of viewing it as if you were a public person on the internet, not logged into Salesforce. So I'm going to open up an incognito window. I'm going to paste in that URL I copied from earlier. If you need it, it should be in your email. So you can get to it that way. Now the other part we're going to need is not just the base URL, but the actual full path to our public page. So the way you can get that information is if we go back into our builder tab that should be open, or our sign up form under the page actions is page 6. We're just there a minute ago. Here's that URL that we had set up with our subdirectory. You can copy this piece and just tack it on to the end of our base URL.
And that slash,
I lost how you got,
Didn't let me grab it.
how I got there.
that's
got here?
slash form is the subdirectory
Yep.
name, so, okay.
Yes, and you can see how it's like showing up in the menu here, how it's like a top level page that, you know, has a bunch of options under it. So as you add new forms, you can add all of them under this forms subdirectory, just to keep things organized.
Okay.
Another good thing to keep in mind is that that will be part of the URL as well.
Yeah, and if you wanted to customize it, you can go to that form subdirectory and change that piece of it too.
Still getting no login screen.
So after that-
Wasn't too much.
So after the S,
Yep, after the
Then
S, you want to
forms.
paste in /forms/signup. I mean, that's how mine reads.
Yeah.
Yours is going to be maybe a little bit different. And if you do get the URL wrong, it will take you to a login page. But if you get it right, then it'll take you to the page that we just built out. And I did notice these trailhead playgrounds are not optimized, so they do take a little while to load these pages. Your production pages will be much faster, I can guarantee that. Sandboxes are somewhere in between. while mine's spinning up, I'll leave this slide up that sort of pieces together what your URL should look like. It'll be the base URL for your hands-on org. We did an Aura site, so it's going to have /s, and then it'll be the path to your subdirectory and the specific page you set up for your form. So mine is /form/submit. And if yours loaded up, you should now have your public-facing form on the web, and you can go ahead and fill it out. So I'm going to put in my name, I'll put in my work email for this one, and go ahead and submit. If you want to test out the validation, you can do that here too. But once you submit, you should see your success message that we put on that screen at the end. And to prove it all worked, we can go back into our Salesforce org. And from the app launcher, go to your responses custom object that we set up, as long as you set up a tab for it. And you should find your response in this list. That was my test earlier. Number 2 for me is me with my work email.
I'll need your help for a second here.
Sure.
I've got the login to death, and then now I'm on the back end here and not seeing what I need. So what's the best way for me to copy the URL and try again?
The one in your email should tell you the full.
Okay, email.
You can do it from here too. So I would copy everything up through. Oh, here's the sticker. Let's get it out of your email. It'd be the easiest way. While working on that, so this is sort of the launching point for everything else you can do in forms. These are all the basics you would need to set up one of these solutions. So again, there's a whole world of customizing the look and feel of this page, setting up asynchronous automation on your responses object to take action on the data that's coming in. You can do things like relate those response records back to a contact or to a campaign or whatever other data you need to relate it to, so you can see that audit log within the rest of your data architecture. There's a whole world around pre-filling with URL variables, sending emails, you name it. There's everything else you can do with Salesforce flows and automation. You can add all of that in to take some of these form solutions to the next level. We do have about 15 minutes, so I do want to open it up for questions and sort of get your take on if there's anything else you want to see. I can spend a few minutes. I have a few slides at the end that sort of give at least a high-level overview on some of those advanced topics.
So if you have an organization where they're very, very concerned about security, it seems like this is pretty isolated from everything else. Like you can create an experience, even if they have an existing experience site that does require login, you could still have this as being a page and its own thing, completely free and clear of,
Correct.
because it's an island in terms of data.
Yes. As long as you're being very mindful about what you're granting access to. So the only things we made public were this page, and we granted access to one screen flow for that guest user. We didn't give them any sharing settings. We didn't give them any field level access. We didn't give them any object access. So the only things they can do is load this page, and this page has a screen flow that is granted for their profile. All the data connections that we did, we handled in a subflow with elevated permissions.
Yeah.
So you looking at this page as somebody on the internet, you do not have any API access into that Salesforce org. The only thing you can do is run this screen flow.
You're sending but not receiving at all.
That
So-
too, yeah. So back to what Jabari brought up earlier, if you wanted to like take somebody's information and then query and then show more details on the public screen, you are now surfacing data from your work. So you still have to be careful that you don't accidentally have your own data leakage.
Yeah, literally a lookup is just that. It's looking up.
Yeah, a lookup, or even like, clicking next and going to a second screen, but you have like a get records in the middle, and you're like putting that data on the screen, that's public now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there are times where that's okay. I've had use cases where, like I was mentioning for event registrations, where we want to show the event details. So we do set up a query and we get the details for that campaign record, and then we show it on the screen. But we've all acknowledged that A, that's the only data we're retrieving, and B, we're okay with that being public. It's a description for the event.
Yeah.
What we're not doing is we're not querying contact details and showing that on the screen. So there are different levels of what is sensitive data and what is not, as far as retrieving and displaying on a screen.
I've toyed with kind of almost creating my own like authenticator type thing of like almost generating like a string that's changes every 15 minutes because it's a formula field based on time stuff. And then it sends a text to the person that could put that into the form as like a multi-factor sort of thing.
Sure.
I haven't rolled it out publicly or anything like that, but in theory, in practice, it seems to be working.
Okay.
Because we would love for people to be able to update their contact information or things like that, that the record already exists. We don't want to create a new one, but like you said, we don't want to pull anything out. We don't want the URL to be at risk that someone could change some of the characters in there and pull up an entirely different record.
Exactly.
I mean, odds might be slim, but still better not to risk it.
Absolutely. So I think, you can do crafty things like that. It's going to depend on your organization's comfort level with what you're doing there. It's not an authenticated session. So one of the things I've learned is that will probably fail a robust security audit. But if you're not worried about that, it should work just fine. I saw a couple questions from online. Can you embed this form on a website? So one of the things I wanted to touch on was you have a URL here the same way as some of these other form tools sort of give you a URL. And the easiest thing to do is from your site, link to this URL. Now, if you wanted to truly embed this flow on your website, that is possible. It does take a little more work and gets a little more developy. Let me find the right one here. Embedding website. So there's this technology Salesforce has deep in the developer documentation called Lightning Out. And they just released, I believe, the Lightning Web Component version of this, but it still relies on an Aura application, interestingly. But this is where you'd want to, and I have all of the documentation linked down here. You can set up a Lightning Web Component with this Aura application and say that you want it to extend this Lightning Out capability and allow guest access. And then within your component, you are just referencing a flow name. So this is where you would reference your screen flow. And what that does is it ends up embedding the flow component HTML directly into your web page so that it looks and feels and is native to the web page. It's not an iframe at all, so it's, used to be a lot of ways things were embedded was via iframe, and that's its own can of worms of security problems. This method is sort of up-to-date, robust, approved by the internet way of doing it. I would read through the documentation, and you can go down this path to actually embed forms on the website. The nice thing about this method is once you do it, your flow is still being called sort of at runtime. So if you make an update and publish a new version, your script that you put on your website doesn't have to change at all. It just loads the latest active version of the flow. Some of these other form tools, if you make a change to your form, you have to then go republish that script because they're doing it statically. Even though it's embedding and they give it to you and that part of it's nice, it does have that little bit of extra legwork every time you make an update. So a little more upfront cost here to get one of these applications spun up, but once you do, it's sort of a set it and forget it situation.
Yeah, and are there any other updates to like the security that we already configured with the flow and such to use this method?
No, and I'll also point out, everything we did, you would still have to do, except for the part where we created a page. We still need an Experience Cloud site so that we have a guest user that has access, because this script is going to use that profile to authenticate.
I see.
Yeah, so you still need the Experience Cloud site. You still have to grant access to the flow to that guest user. The other piece that will happen here is, I have it as a second bullet point. There's a CORS setting that sort of allows scripts to run on certain websites. So you're gonna have to add in your company's website to the CORS settings. Pretty easy, but easy to overlook
Yeah.
and not know why it's not working.
Mhm.
So once you get those two things set up, that's all we'd have to do from a security perspective. As far as the flow running, it's the same thing as the guest user loading this web page. It's just happening on your website instead of in its own dedicated web page.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the other, do I have examples, use case when you would use another form tool instead of this solution? Ever since Flow came out with conditional visibility, that was sort of the kicking point for me that I couldn't use Salesforce ScreenFlows because that was lacking. Once that came out, I have only been using ScreenFlows for all of my form solutions for all of my clients for the last 4 years now. So I haven't used any other form tools in that time. I've actually migrated a client away from form tools so they could save on that cost, and then we could expand out what that form was trying to do and actually come up with a more robust solution. Jesse, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Hey, Evan, thank you so much for this course. As usual, this is fantastic information. I sent something in the chat. I'm not sure if it went directly to you or not. I actually we use FormStack in my office, and then we initially didn't have it, so I built something. There's like a free form version that's available on AppExchange that uses Experience Cloud, and it was a bit challenging to use at first, but it seems to me a lot more beneficial than the form program, mainly because I put validation rules in my systems. But one issue I have experienced is compatibility issues. So it doesn't typically have mobile support. And then the other issue is anything that was based on a Safari browser, whether it was on a mobile device or just a Mac computer, it would say that it was submitted and then just disappear. Have you had any issues with compatibility with any of the other Experience Cloud stuff?
These forms load pretty dynamically on mobile, so that part works nicely. If you're doing like custom components from unofficial SF, your mileage may vary, especially stuff like sliders, or there's a couple weird things, but a lot of the native components all work nicely on mobile. I haven't tested Safari browser specifically, but Salesforce does list out what browsers are supported by all of their technology, so we could dive into the documentation on that and make sure that all this Flow native components will work on Safari browser too. But one thing you could do now is if you have your link, you could load it up on your phone and see how it looks there.
Yeah, I've definitely done that. It doesn't. It's usable, but the fields are all off. And the only issue for me, and that's perfectly fine. If we don't have it available for mobile use, that's reasonable. But if it's confirming that it was sent and then that record's never created, that's where I'm more concerned.
Right. I haven't had that kind of issue. So I have these solutions in place in the wild with a handful of different clients. And once we get them tested and working, they work. They work on the browser, they work on the phone. I haven't had any issues to date.
Well, after this course, I'll be more brave to build it out myself instead of using this other this other integration platform. But again, thank you very much, and really appreciate everything you shared today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. Any other questions from online?
I know we're kind of on time, but can you say just a little bit more about pointing in the right direction of taking it to the next step of, all right, we've got the response created, but now how do I create or update a contact record and make a campaign for that, since that seems to be among the more common use cases?
Yeah, so for that, you'd want to, if you're familiar with flows and you're using Flow for automation, I would point you in the direction of setting up asynchronous record triggered flows on the response object. And what that means is your record triggered flow is gonna get kicked off when that response is created, but it's gonna run in its own separate transaction after the fact.
Right.
That way you guarantee your response data lands in that response record, but your automation to go like look up a contact, maybe create one, create a campaign member, you do all of that in a record triggered subflow, not sub, record triggered
Separate flow.
asynchronous flow.
So if your sign up form either, and this again, also where I'm a little like, how do I, the what I'm signing up for, like I am signing up for event one. And the name of event one or the ID of event one is somewhere in the response, you know, then your separate flow can say, okay, when this field equals the ID of this campaign, then do the things, create the record and put it in.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
How to put the right campaign name or ID in the form in the first place.
I would either tack it on as a URL parameter, and then you can pass it into your flow for just the ID. The other way to do it is, and we didn't cover this, but you can set up like object pages on your Experience Cloud site, and it sort of is planning to spin up a page for every record in your Salesforce org already. The URL is a little bit different for that. It's going to have your object name in it, and then it's going to have the record ID. It's the same way like when you navigate to an object record internally. You get the public version of that.
Okay.
If you're okay with those two pieces, then you could take advantage of the object page and just adjust that layout to put your screen flow on that object page.
But it feels like the pre-fill the form using the URL parameters, like if you have a hidden field of like what the name or the ID of the campaign you're talking about is, and you want to pre-fill it, that like I see that you've got to follow up like one of your detailed slides at the end around that. So I go down that path. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, with URL parameters or something pre-filling. Yep. So that you'd go down this path where you would have to be careful to, you know, send people the right link. You can generate it with a formula field on your like campaign object and say like, here's the public link to sign up for this event, and you post that wherever you want to post it, and that ID you put as a URL parameter would get passed into the flow. Sort of handle it from there. Any other thoughts or questions?
Just to clarify one more time, I think this is what we were talking about, but like, if I was building based off a use case where like trying to have a event registration form, and I was thinking if I could have like a formula filled with a link that would then use this to pass in the ID of that event record, and then they can take that link and then add it to the website or something. But it's just that that question mark, and then I would do ID equals.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's your URL parameter, and then any variables you set up in your flow that you mark available for input. When you go to your Experience Cloud site, you're specifying the flow, they're going to show up
Yeah, you were
in
saying
that
okay.
properties. And that's where you want to specify, if you look there, your URL parameter.
Okay, that's that
Yeah.
screen. Okay.
So my variable in this example in the flow is called first name input, all lowercase.
Yeah,
The URL parameter is just first name. I did it so I can distinguish that those are two separate things and you need to map them by specifying first name as the value for first name input.
mhm,
And it's wrapped in curly brackets with an exclamation point.
yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, if you have trouble, let me know, we can sort that part out.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. We're at time here, so we'll end the Zoom. If you have any other follow-up questions, I'll leave my contact information up on the slide here. I also have the QR code for the slides if you need to get a hold of that. Thank you so much and look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Still clap for the room.
Yeah.
Awesome.